Hello, friends. This is Pastor Marcy and Pastor Chris here meeting with Olivia, welcomed guest who is Zooming in with us from Nicaragua. And Pastor Chris and I are going to be interviewing Olivia and more of an informal conversation about her work in Nicaragua, a ministry that we have been supporting as the church for many years. And so we wanted to hear more about what she is doing. And for me personally, who has never been to Nicaragua, I wanted to just hear more about what that experience has been like and just more about Olivia, who we support. And so Olivia, welcome. It's so good to see you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And so just a couple of questions just to get to know you more. Just wondering if you could share with us your journey of getting to Nicaragua. And that very good question for a missionary is, how did God lead you to be a missionary in Nicaragua? Like, what were you doing before? Yeah, how did you get to Nicaragua?
Great. Yeah, thank you it's a good question to be able to backtrack and think back on how God has kind of led me and led others on this sort of journey. So I appreciate the question a lot. And just a little bit of background, I'm from Omaha, Nebraska, and I went to school at Northwestern College in Orange City, Iowa. So that's kind of my RCA connection. And I'd grown up in church and was interested in missions and really enjoyed learning Spanish. And during my time at Northwestern, through some different classes in the religion department, I had been really interested in missions, but got to this point of feeling pretty jaded about a lot of what I knew of the historic missions movement and its ties with colonialism and, these conversations about how when we're trying to help, sometimes we can actually hurt others. And so by my junior year of college, I got to this point of feeling pretty jaded, especially about short-term missions. And somehow, by the grace of God, in the midst of that, I actually ended up coming down to Nicaragua and visiting your other mission partners, Adrian and Bernadette Bob Kelly, in Bluefields. And it was during that trip that God really opened my eyes to just a very different way of doing missions and doing missions together with people around the world. At the end of that week, someone had asked Pastor Adrian, we're really glad to be here. This has been awesome. But we really want to know, do you want us here? Or do you just want maybe the money from all of our flights to come down? And for those of you that know Pastor Adrian, he had a very wise and short response. He just said, you can send a lot of money in the mail, but you can't send a hug in the mail. And that was, for me in that moment, it just highlighted the importance of this idea that working together in missions happens in the context and the foundation of a relationship and a partnership. And that was affirmed, and it's been affirmed to me since then. And so along the way there, I ended up back in Nicaragua volunteering with CEPAD for a few months. And CEPAD is another ministry, grassroots organization working in Nicaragua, and was a volunteer helping host the sort of trips that Del Mar has come down on for years. Didn't get to help host Del Mar that year in 2014, but they at that time invited me to consider coming on longer term. And after all of those questions, I really saw a strong model, not just of partnership between the local church and international churches in ministry, but also just the ministry that CEPAD's doing, this Christian community development that's really responding and answering to poverty, or bringing answers to these cycles of poverty. And so that was something that I wanted to be a part of. And so it took a while, but eventually got back here as an RCA missionary serving with CEPAD. And another part of that story that I feel like is important is my husband, Phil. So I had asked him, he's here working too, and I asked him to come over and join and say hi for a minute.
Great.
So this is Phil.
Hi, guys.
Hi, Phil. Good to see you.
Pastor Chris.
And so Phil came into the picture in the midst of this whole journey. I think it was while I was applying to be an RCA missionary that we met. We'll save you the long story, but he actually read about me in a publication from Northwestern, and my something from my time first with CEPAD in Nicaragua, and he wrote me a letter, and we wrote back and forth for a year before we eventually met and ended up dating. And a few years later, he found himself proposing and moving to Nicaragua. So that's another, whole story. But to give you the condensed version, and I'll let Phil share just a little bit about what he's doing in Nicaragua.
Yeah, so I work with a different ministry, as Olivia said. It's called Engineering Ministries International. We're mostly a group of engineers and architects. EMI has offices around the globe, but they do have an office here in Nicaragua, and we do projects and work with other ministries and nonprofits to help them in the design and construction of any sorts of building structure projects they have. So if there's a need, we're able to come alongside them. They have a vision for a new church, a new school. We can kind of help them through that planning process. So it's in my area. I have a degree in structural engineering. And they also really emphasize discipleship, training, and investing in both the local staff here, as well as the expat staff. So yeah, it's a really neat ministry. If there are any engineers or architects in Del Mar, always feel free to reach out to me. Would love to make a connection. So. Did I miss anything?
I think that's the summary. So
we were
planning.
Oh,
what's that?
To our power couple. Oh my goodness.
Phil, I want to know how your Spanish is.
Mejor. He estado practicando por muchas veces, muchos años.
Whoa.
Funny because he just made an error, but
under pressure, not as good, Pastor Chris.
he was just starting to learn Spanish when Pastor Chris was last here, and I asked him just recently, do you think you're bilingual? And he said, yeah, I think so. So he's come a long ways.
I still have a lot to learn, but it's significantly improved. And our office, the EMI office, operates in Spanish, so get to practice every day.
That's great.
That's great. Oh, Phil, good to see you.
It's good to meet you guys.
Bye, Phil.
All right. Yeah,
Great.
so that's a little bit about us.
Yeah. So that's so wonderful. And I love that you talk about this sense of partnership in Nicaragua and like that deep importance. And so for me, as someone who's never been to Nicaragua, I'm curious, how would you describe it? What's it like living in Nicaragua? I mean, you go from Nebraska to Iowa, then to Nicaragua. What's it like?
Well, we joke sometimes that Nebraska and Nicaragua are really similar because the main agriculture crops are corn and beans in both places and cattle. But I'm actually from the city, Omaha. But so that's a way that maybe they're similar, but of course there are a lot of differences. I think when I talk about Nicaragua, the first thing is just to describe, even though it is a developing nation and there's a lot of poverty, it is a beautiful place, a place of immense natural beauty and just beauty in the people. There's this just immense history of difficulty and struggle. Nicaragua's relationship with the United States is very complex. They've had a lot of, there's been civil war, the revolution, dictatorship, there's all of this history that's very, very difficult. And yet in the people, you just see this continual, persistent, and I think really persevering hope that is an example to me as a North American with a very different experience. And that has been just something that has meant a lot to me and often challenged me. And so it's a wonderful place to visit. It up until these difficulties the past few years, it had a growing and booming tourism industry because it really is in and of itself just amazing. And then at the same time, there are these big things that are very hard, and that we also see the people here taking huge strides to bring about change and to bring about good for the people with God's help.
Yeah, which this kind of leads into it's beautiful segue of this good work that's being done with God's help. If you were to describe what you do in a typical week, maybe no week is very typical, But if someone were to ask you what you do, how would you describe that, or what would you say?
Yeah, at a broader level, Phil and I have kind of come to embrace the phrase building bridges. He's actually a bridge engineer, so he can lay claim to that phrase in a much more physical sense than I can, as he can design and help build bridges. But I think we own that phrase also in a more metaphorical sense, both with his work at EMI, but then with me at CEPAD, really wanting to be that bridge and connection culturally, linguistically. I didn't mention that my background is in medical interpreting, so Spanish and English. But then beyond that, helping build up these relationships that we were talking about. So my main focus at CEPAD is actually building a volunteer program. So CEPAD is looking to design and implement, have more kind of concrete opportunities for young people, both Nicaraguans and foreigners, to be able to come and get involved with their work and participate. I did that when I was in 2014, but there wasn't really any support or a program. I just kind of showed up and they said, we'll find you some breakfast and we'll find you somewhere you can live. And it was like, okay, great. But wanting to have more of a formational program and experience around that. So that's something I've been working on a lot, that involves not so glamorous of work in an office at a computer, fleshing out this program and meeting with our other staff as we look to see what that could look like over future years, and thinking about really the next generation of leadership at CEPAD. But then besides that, also get to help host visiting groups sometimes and design educational immersion experiences. We're hoping Western Seminary can get down here. They were planning to come and it was postponed because of coronavirus. So looking to help create those experiences where people can really connect and learn from one another. So that part's fun, being able to get out and visit the 40 communities where CEPAD works and bring other people out there to make those connections. But so it's a mix of in an office and then out with people.
So wait, you're saying that being a missionary isn't always that glamorous? Wait,
not at all. No. No, we love it, and I think the word, privilege is very complicated these days, but we do sense a profound just gift from God and our privilege to be able to be a part of what He's doing through the local church here. But it's not always glamorous, no.
Yeah, that's so cool. And I love, once again, it's fostering relationships and partnerships and connection, both in the community and also stateside as well. That's great. So you mentioned that you work with CEPAD, and I'm curious, how has that changed over the past few months with coronavirus, but then also you mentioned the past couple of years have been kind of challenging. And so I'm curious, how has that work been the same, changed through CEPAD?
It has been, I think, these months, anywhere you go, things look really different over the past in 2020 than they have any time before then. And so that has certainly been true at CEPAD and in Nicaragua. A little bit of background for maybe those that don't know. CEPAD they're really a grassroots community development organization. So over the past 48 years, they've done a lot of different work, but they've come to say we've found a model that we believe really helps support communities where no one else is going and visiting really rural places that don't have support from others. We found systems and training we can give them that will help them take steps to get out of poverty as a community. So rather than coming in and answering questions, how are we going to train people so that they can do this themselves? And so they work in 40 villages, and a big question during this time has been, how can we support those villages in the midst of the pandemic? So some of their work has continued on, but in a different way, without as many visits out to the communities. And besides that, one of the really big things is that we've designed an emergency response project. And so the people out in these villages are at really high risk for health reasons if and when we think coronavirus will get out there, just without access to resources or transportation to get medical care. But then there's also been a huge impact economically, as we've seen everywhere, but we have a very at-risk population already who was maybe just getting by, or was getting, a lot of our families have a family member working and living abroad somewhere and sending remittances or sending money home for the family to survive. And we had over 500 people return to the villages from other countries. And so all of those families have lost their income that helps them buy essentials like medicine and school supplies, but then also buy seeds to plant and to have food. So there's been big questions of food security, also. And so that's what CEPAD has really been listening with the community and has developed this response program to try to support these families amidst that.
Mm. Yeah, it's amazing the impact of all these different ripple effects that can happen. So, yeah.
And we know that all over the world, like this is true, and that I think what's hard is that it's vulnerable populations that are the most impacted and the hardest hit, when all over there are people suffering, and those who are already in very difficult circumstances. This just, for people who are maybe just getting by, it puts them in a very high risk situation, and a lot of people, are suffering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, and for letting us in on that. So I'll pass it over to Pastor Chris, and I think he has a couple of more specific questions.
And one of the things I was going to ask you, Olivia, is kind of what you all are doing to respond to the current, crisis, not just in Nicaragua. We're feeling crisis, everybody's feeling it, but you kind of explained that a little bit with these responses. You talked about how things have changed with less kind of in-person visits. I know that's been a key component of kind of working with the villages. So are there other shifts that you're seeing in CEPAD during the last few months, that not just the programmatic, really working on like a kind of a health response, but also kind of the structures? Have you seen, has CEPAD been forced to adapt to different ways of doing things right now?
Mm-hmm. Yep, certainly so. CEPAD, just last year, it was November, that we started dabbling in doing work and meetings virtually. So that was a new thing, and it was good that we started then, since we were really forced into it this spring. And so they have been doing a lot more of their work. We've been doing another piece of what CEPAD is doing in 2020 is we're preparing to enter into 42 new communities over the next 5 years. So preparing what our next 5 years of ministry is, and strategic planning. That was already going to be happening in June and July of this year. So we've still carried on that strategic planning, but now looking at what will it look like to do that in this potential new context, where we don't really know what all we'll be able to go back to doing as we did before, and what is going to need to shift and be different in the long term. But I think doing a lot more of that work virtually, rather than bringing in our staff from around the country, has been a challenge, just because we maybe weren't the most technologically inclined or savvy, or really had the resources in terms of technology and equipment to do that. But I'd say that we've come a long ways. It's going really well now. And then besides that, a lot more contact with the communities, not over through visits, but through WhatsApp groups have become really important. WhatsApp is just a texting app that's really common around the world. So staying in touch with communities and leaders in new ways, and through phone calls, that is good, but is an adjustment in a relational culture where you're used to seeing each other and hugging and kissing and all of that. And so I think it has been a challenge, but CEPAD, they have pressed on and served throughout the revolution, earthquake, hurricane, civil war, always found the ways, how are we going to keep serving people who are in need? And this is the first time that I've been really here to see that, when I've heard about it throughout history. And so that's what they're doing.
So Olivia, I'm going to go off script a little bit because we thought about some questions ahead of time, but so I know that you've talked about how you work on like volunteer engagement and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I personally have seen you at work in instantaneous translation, not only just the technical terms, but the actual concepts. And I know that's where you have incredible gifts. Are there other things that you're being called on to do now that are stretching you? Because, just right now, there's not a lot of, you can plan all you want for volunteer engagement, but it's planning right now. You can't really do a lot of that right now, right? So where have you seen your personal journey kind of been stretched or taken to?
Yeah, that is a very good question. I hadn't touched on that, but one of the things that I've started to get involved in more during the pandemic that I wasn't involved in has actually been fundraising, which we had talked about a little bit before. That hasn't been my area of focus at CEPAD, but during this time when we did have volunteers coming that were canceled and had to send a volunteer home. And yeah, you guys were canceled. You were coming too.
The day before we left, yeah.
I know. Yep. I'm really sorry. That feels so far back now, but that was really hard right at the beginning of this. And so I've ended up getting more involved in working with our partners and donors as we've tried to fundraise for this coronavirus emergency response, and I've never really been involved in grant writing, for example, and some of that. It's a different area that I enjoy, but didn't have any actual experience in. But that's felt like a very tangible way to be able to support CEPAD's efforts, and I've been grateful to get to learn a little bit. We've had a really good response. It has been amazing to see how people have responded, even knowing that the economic situation around the world is really hard. But we continue to keep fundraising to implement these different pieces of their project. I didn't explain a lot, but what their project has involved has been health kits, so masks and sanitary, distributing to all 1,300 families we work with these health kits, emergency seeds for families that haven't had seeds to plant. They've had a big preventative education campaign, really trying to combat misinformation, help people know how they can protect themselves amidst the pandemic, and then distributing water filters and supporting our pastors and leaders in doing crisis counseling in their communities. So those have been the main areas that CEPAD has been at work, and that's not really my place to go do that, but rather to be supporting our local staff who's doing that, and funding is an important piece.
So maybe, Olivia, my next question will tie into that too then. So what specific needs are you guys seeing? So I see what you're responding to, mm-hmm. right? And you talked about some fundraising, so maybe that's part of it too, but what needs are you seeing right now, either specific or large scale, with the work you're doing, what CEPAD's doing?
Mm-hmm. I think I maybe mentioned a little bit about kind of the needs we've seen in the communities. This plan was developed working with our leaders. So across the 40 communities, each village has a board of 6 leaders that CEPAD has trained and is working with. And I think the issues of food security, of education, when there's been that's true. I know that's true in the United States too, just such a host of misinformation, and of working to combat this fear and even kind of stigmatism or discrimination. That was an issue that as people were coming back to the villages from other places, there was a lot of, that was causing issues in the communities. So how can we work through this, and how can we support a lot of these families that are in crisis as their economic sources have dried up, or income sources. And so those are some of the needs that we've seen in the village and how the villages and how CEPAD is responding. I think more broadly thinking about needs in our whole context, besides this finances that really do help that work happen. Another is just prayer, and that is always true, but has felt more important than ever, I think, during this chapter, because there's a lot that's out of our control, and a lot that we just know we need God to work and to intervene and just to be present amidst a lot of difficulty. Something that I didn't mention earlier, as you asked, what have you felt called into that's been new in this time, has just been another thing is really trying to learn more what the ministry of presence and just being here and in solidarity in a time when a lot of people left and pulled out. And I haven't mentioned this, but in June, one of our founding staff that has been at CEPAD for 48 years passed away. And that week we had 3 other staff lose family members, not all to coronavirus, but it was just like an awful week that it seemed like it would just never end. And so CEPAD, and I think like a lot of Nicaraguans, as coronavirus has hit really hard, are in a place of grief and a lot of questions about the future. And so just to continue to be here and to be open to what that means, to try to support and be with people amidst a lot of very big trials has been something that Phil and I have been continually asking ourselves and trying to be attentive to the Spirit in, and doing our best. But so I think amidst that context, prayer is like one of the only things we can really do. So praying we're grateful for your prayers for guidance, but then also praying for the community members, the villages, and praying for our staff who are going out to deliver these kids and their protection. All of that, I think, is one of the biggest needs we always have, is to just be putting this all before God.
Wonderful. And so you've kind of woven some of this into, so Olivia, let me just respond to what you said. So certainly kind of as a pastor of Delmar Reformed Church, and others who watch this will certainly make an appeal for prayers for you and Phil and for CEPAD. I think Marcy has the ability, if you can send us some information on specific, like a link for the project that you're talking about, because while we as a church support you, and as you mentioned, Bluefields Ministries there too, we do some work with scholarships for college university students. But if we have members who want to specifically respond to that need, we can put that in our video details here on YouTube videos there. So we'll get that information for you, and we'll make sure anybody who's watching, if you're interested in knowing more about this and how you can financially support it, you'll be able to find that link. But
great, thank you very much, Chris. I think it is a very specific, tangible need right now. So it's an emergency response, and so the faster that we are able to carry it out and have funding to carry it out, the better. And so we've been so grateful, and I think if God is putting it on anyone's heart or leading you to be a part of that and to join us in these efforts, we all at CEPAD will just be so grateful. So thank you for the invitation and for considering it. And at the same time, thank you. I feel like this is a good time just to say thank you so much for your long-term support in so many areas in Nicaragua, not just us personally, which means so much, but in Bluefields and in the communities. We're just immensely grateful for I've been talking so much about partnership, and you guys are one of those huge examples of a long-term relationship in mission here. So I know that's a little bit of a tangent, but I just really wanted to express our gratefulness. I'll let you get back to your question, Chris.
Yeah, so maybe just kind of as we wrap up, Olivia, I wonder maybe, and these could be specifics, it could be just in general. So as we part from our conversation, what are some notes about what are encouraging, what things are encouraging to you right now? Where are you finding like real hope for things? And what are you seeing as some serious challenges? The finances are certainly part of that and that kind of thing. So maybe you could leave us with some ideas of what you're feeling of encouragement, and where you're thinking that's going to be a tough one.
Yes, I think even now Phil and I, we have as we've talked and we've prayed, we've come back to just this abiding sense that even now, when so much is not how we would want it to be and is not how we would desire for things to happen. And when we look at CEPAD's context, and I mean globally, and in Nicaragua, all over, we've just had this abiding sense that God has not abandoned us and is still at work. And I think maybe we didn't feel that all along, but in recent months, that's really we've come to that place of just peace, of knowing that God is still at work and seeing us through this valley that I think a lot of people are in or have been in these months. And so I think that has been personally a really big encouragement, just to know that even now we can trust God and we can choose joy amidst trials. And we've seen these little glimpses of really beautiful things. I participated in, or went out just to one distribution of health kits because we needed to get some photos of it. And it was supposed to be just one adult that came from each family to get their health kit, but one mom brought her son along. And he was so excited. I'll see if I can send you a picture of it. He unpacked the kit and put his mask on and was just overjoyed. And his mom explained later that because he left, he took his mask and ran home to give his sister her mask. And it was so precious. He just, she explained that he had wanted a mask and they didn't have the resources or couldn't get them far off. But these just little moments of joy amidst a lot of hard things was really beautiful. But I think more broadly, some really encouraging points have been seeing partnerships like Del Mar's continue on, but a lot of new churches and new relationships be budding just over these past few years. We love when people come and visit, and so I hope that Del Mar is able to come back soon. That is always one of my favorite times, when we get to spend time with visiting congregations. And I would even challenge maybe people who think, that's not for me, to consider, maybe that is something that I should think about or pray about. And so I think that has been an encouragement just over these years, to see those grow and to see two communities take steps together, not because of something we're coming in and doing, but because of what they're capable of doing on their own when they work together and have that encouragement from a group like CEPAD. On the flip side then is thinking about maybe challenges. I think the biggest one is just that Nicaragua is in a really hard context after the political instability a couple of years ago and then the pandemic now. What everyone is experiencing in a recession right now is what Nicaragua's already been experiencing for 2 years. And then it's just been doubled, it feels like. So I think for a lot of families, there's just a lot of questions and a lack of hope of, well, maybe the economy will bounce back for some, but the economy was already just barely getting back on its feet over these past couple of years. And so we recognize it's a hard context to take steps forward in, but also know that that's the reason to press in and not give up. And so I think these challenges have just affirmed maybe our personal call, but then also the ministry's call to continue in the work we're doing, because it's as needed as ever. And so that's a really big thing that we can't change the whole country's situation, but we can do little parts to try to encourage families.
Right. I think I've been doing some work myself with some other pastors right now, Olivia, and we've been talking about, kind of, I wouldn't say revising, but maybe focusing our prayers on not getting God to show up and do what we want, but to open our eyes to what God is already doing and how we can join in that. So this idea that even in places it feels really challenging, there's still lots of good things that God is doing in Nicaragua here. And we see our partnership that we've had and we're like, oh, what's new and different and shiny? And we just say, yeah, you know what? There's a lot good going on right now that if we want to, we can invest even more in our prayer lives and in supporting. So the idea that there's some really good pathways to finding where God is at work already, and kind of just having our eyes open to how we can be a part of that is a wonderful thing. So we appreciate you helping us to understand that a little bit more about your context and about how we can be kind of continue to be connected in that, maybe in new ways for us, but maybe just reinforcing the ways that we've tried to be connecting with you all in the past too. So we're very grateful for your time. We thank you for joining us, and for Phil too. And we look forward to that day where we're not meeting over Zoom, but maybe we're celebrating with you here to welcome you in the future. And certainly where we're resuming our trips down to see you and all your coworkers down there and all the people that we've come to know. So we really are grateful for your time with us. And we look forward to our time when we see each other again, whether it's over the computer or whether it's in person. So we'll leave you with that and offer you God's blessings. And we wish to, we wish to see what's in store for the future, because we know there's going to be exciting things that continue to happen.
Great. Yep, I agree. And we look forward to it too, and look forward to continuing on this journey together. I said that Del Mar has been one of these really historic, like the example. Del Mar was working with CEPAD before the RCA really was before. And so we're just thankful for this relationship and partnership, and being able to do it together and maybe try new things together too, as we look ahead to what this new era will look like. So we appreciate you, and I know that's on behalf of El Castillo and the staff at CEPAD and Bluefields, all of us. Thanks.
Thank you, Olivia.